Hi everybody, my name's Zack from Inner North Brewing Company. Video for today's monthly subscription is going to be a little different. One cut, one location. Let's see how much I can muck it up. We had plans to film today at the brewery, but guess who's in ISO again? This guy. Still haven't caught COVID yet, but did ISO a little while ago because my partner caught COVID. Somehow I didn't. And now her parents are visiting and they both got COVID on Saturday, or tested positive on Saturday. So I'm back in ISO. Meanwhile, my partner's free as a bird. Doesn't seem fair, does it? But hey, everyone, the good news is that everyone had very mild cases and I haven't gotten sick yet. Guess that's a bonus. This month's subscription is the much awaited, very special fresh hop harvest beers that we've been promising you. Basically, hop harvest only comes once a year. Well, once in the southern hemisphere, once in the northern hemisphere. And so late summer, sort of going into autumn, is the time when hops are picked in Australia. So a few of the hop producers, through great annoyance, it's good for their promotions, they organized that we can get fresh hops, which is great. And what we mean by fresh hops is hops are a flower, essentially, and they grow on a vine, spelled with a B, not a V. They grow on a vine, and they grow very rapidly. They get about, in a single season, they basically climb up a rope, and they get 12 meters tall before harvest. And then harvest comes along. Basically, they just cut the vines down and have these cool machines that just strip all the flowers and separate the flowers from the vine and the leaves. And you're left with these very beautiful hop flowers that kind of look like bud, just prettier. And normally what happens at that point is the hop flowers are then taken to essentially a kiln where they are they're dried out without burning them. And all the moisture is removed. And then they are usually macerated and compressed into these little pellets that look like rabbit poo. And those are what we use the other 12 months of the year when we can't get fresh hops. And they're a really good, effective form of hop compression, of hop storage, because it's macerated. When you use it in the boil or use it in beer, it breaks up into small little bits, so you get really good efficiency. And because it's compressed into a little pellet, there's not a lot of oxygen that can get introduced to it. And then those are put into either vacuum sealed or nitrogen purged foil packs and sealed, and we keep them in a cool room. And you can use them, and they can stay pretty fresh in that form for about 2 years. And then after about 2 years, you got to start thinking about, maybe we should just send those to the compost and get some fresh ones. But so that's normally how we use hops. But once a year during harvest, we get hops straight off the vine, which means they don't go through any of that processing. They aren't dried out, and they aren't macerated or compressed. So you just get these beautiful flowers like you see in all the pictures of pretty much any company that grows hops will have a hop, thing. Half the breweries have a little hop thing. So it's kind of ironic that we almost never see them in that form in a working brewery, unless you happen to have some vines on your own, which is something we want to work on. It's coming up, planting seasons in winter, so maybe we can get on that this year. So rambling on a bit, I know, but it's kind of interesting. It's kind of an interesting part of one of the agricultural products that goes into making delicious beer. However, the challenges with fresh hops. So hop harvest, when we take them straight off the vine and use them in the beer, they're called fresh hops, green hops, sometimes wet hops because they aren't dried out. And so the main challenge is because they have that moisture, they go off quickly. If you pick them off the vine, you have about 72 hours from picking time. to put them into the beer. And if you don't, they stop smelling like delicious hops and start smelling a little bit like onion and garlic. And I know that from personal experience because 2 years ago when COVID was sort of settling in, there was a few things happening at once. And I said, I'm going to deal with those hops tomorrow. And then the next day they were not quite right. And because it was COVID, I wasn't really willing to risk it by trying to use them anyways. Because going into the first year of COVID, just really did not want to have to deal with dumping a tank of beer. I mean, you never want to have to deal with that, but even worse when you, if you can remember that first month of when everything was happening, end of March 2 years ago. So let's get on with the beers a little bit more. I'll talk more about fresh hops as we get into them. But the first beer we're going to taste today is the fresh hop Flipside. So fresh hops come straight off the vine. So they're separated from leaves, but they're very minimally processed. So that means they're a plant. So you're basically adding a plant to your beer. So most breweries that use fresh hops in their beer, they'll use them in the whirlpool. And the reason for that is you need to use a lot of fresh hops, and you want to get them, and they're not the most easiest thing to use. So it's quite convenient for breweries to use them at the end of the boil, because then any bugs in there, any dirt in there, any bacteria in there gets killed by the boil, but you still get maximized sort of the flavors and aromas from them, because they have all their water weight. You need to use and they're not broken down. You need to use at least 6 times as much. So that's a lot of vegetal material. So most breweries will use it in the whirlpool. That's also good because fresh hops from a production scheduling perspective are an absolute nightmare, because you don't know exactly when they're going to get picked. You get a rough idea of, oh, this might be this picking week, and then that might get updated the week before. And so you sort of need to have a tank that's empty, ready to receive freshly brewed beer, and then you need to be ready to brew that beer as soon as the hops arrive. The other way, apart from adding them in at the end of the boil, that you can use them, that's a little bit more controversial because of the fact that they're a natural plant product with all the things that come along out of the paddock, is using them to dry hop your beer. Except it's not dry hopping because the hops aren't dry, so it's called wet hopping. So wet hopping is when you take those fresh hops and you dunk them in the beer, basically, and you leave them in the beer for a few days, and then you pull them out again. In this situation, we used Francis, our hop cannon, which is this is pretty much exactly what Francis is made for. So instead, we basically have this 100-liter tank. We jam full of 15 kilos of fresh Enigma hops, and then we hook it up to the big tank of beer, and we recirc. And we recirc to be honest, we recirced for an hour, and then we let it sit overnight, and then we did a taste test and recirced a bit more, and because we didn't want to overdo it, because this is a Pilsner, until we get that real fresh floral characteristics that you get from fresh hopped Enigma in the dry hop. So it's a bit controversial. It's a beer that you want to drink fresh. I would really hesitate to put this into cans for a long period of time, where they might sit on a shelf for several months, but fresh out of the keg, one of my favorite types of beer is a beer that's been dry hopped or wet hopped with freshly picked hops. So fresh hop Flipside is our Flipside Pilsner, wet hopped with freshly picked Enigma hops from Tasmania. So let's have a taste. The main difference between our normal Flipside Pilsner and this one is the aroma. The aroma just has that delicious floral, fruity Enigma characteristic. Real gentle, real smooth smell. I love that aroma. And it's just we're not trying to do anything crazy with this beer. It's just easy drinking Pilsner with that little bit of real perfumey, gentle, delicate flavors that are just this is one of my favorite beers, and you can only get it once a year. So the crisp, easy drinking Flipside Pilsner is a great backdrop for the real subtle flavors that we're trying to bring out from the wet hopping in this situation. But yeah, so that's the fresh hop Flipside, 4.2%. It'll be available in the online shop later this week, or you can come have a pint down at the bar. It's been on tap at the bar for a few weeks because it's the first one ready after hop harvest, because we're just wet hopping. We don't need to wait for the whole beer to ferment. And highly recommend it. Highly recommend it. And real funsies, get yourself a bottle of our normal Pilsner and do a side by side, which is what we do when we're like, oh, should we recircuit more? No, it's good. Yeah. So, fresh hop Flipside. Delicious. Next up, Life of Brian. So, Life of Brian got its name, and this backstory of Life of Brian is what I was just telling you about. It was originally conceived as a fresh hop beer, where we were going to use two types of fresh hops, Galaxy and Ella, in the Whirlpool 2 years ago. And then COVID happened, things took longer than they were supposed to, and we ended up not using the hops in time. So we ended up, that original batch of Life of Brian ended up not being the fresh hop beer that it was intended to be, but instead we just used normal hops. And so the name of it, Life of Brian, is just referring to, time to time in life there'll be some trouble, but you always got to look on the bright side of life, right? Monty Python reference. So this is a easy drinking pale ale with quite a large, with a significant quantity of Ella and Galaxy hops in the Whirlpool, fresh hop Ella and Galaxy in the Whirlpool. So let's have a taste. So in the Whirlpool, just to clarify again, when we call the Whirlpool, that's right at the end, after the boil's finished. You whirlpool your big vat of boiling wort, which will become beer. And you do that to send everything, all the little bits and pieces, whirlpool, that when the whirlpool makes them all gather at the bottom of the kettle so they don't end up going through your heat exchange in the fermenter. So when we say whirlpool additions, we're talking about basically adding things after the boil's finished, when we're giving the thing basically the thing's getting a big stir, and that's when you add it. And so it's not getting added at 100 degrees, but usually at like 95 or 90 or 85 degrees, right? Or even 80 degrees, depending on the beer we're brewing. But yeah, so this Whirlpool edition here. So let's have a smell. There's a lot more hops in that. Galaxy and Ella is a classic combo that basically they're two Aussie hops that have just really really stayed relevant over the years, even with all the new hops that have come in. So there's a little bit of passion fruit, a little bit of dankness, some stone fruit going on there. So let's have a taste. I know that was a generous taste. Again, I just find I don't know the science behind this. I should, I guess, but I find with the fresh hop beers, the mouthfeel is just a little bit softer in the beer. And that makes sense to me with the dry hops, perhaps, but it doesn't really make, with the wet hops, but it doesn't really make sense to me in the Whirlpool. It might be a mental thing. But yeah, just goes down real smooth. But lots of fruitiness, and you basically get that fresh hop characteristic that is pervasive in all fresh hop beers. Is you sort of get that, like, for lack of a better term, like a vegetal farmyardy vibe to it, an earthy, grassy, vegetal vibe that comes with basically adding kilos and kilos of vegetal material into your beer. But yeah, real easy drinking pale ale. Great summer crusher. I know we're at the tail end of the summer, but hop harvest is when hop harvest is. Um, Again, we'll be on the online shop. It's available. It's on tap at the bar already, so come check it out. Delicious. What is that? Just at the end of the tongue there, it's just this nice little, like soft, smooth floralness to it. That's just real delicate. Love it. Love it. All right. Last but not least. Oh man, this is not looking good in the current lighting. I feel like we can do better than that. Oh well. This is I Once Knew a Girl Named Amber Ale. It's a beautiful red ale. Beautiful red ale. Can I get just if I turn on this light? Nah, that's even worse. You'll have to take my word for it because I'm using my phone to film this. I can't even put a torch behind it for you. But, or can I? Nah. Anyways, you have to trust me. Beautiful red color. Looks like mud right now on this camera, but beautiful red color. Sorry, I was just thinking if I could make a light with my phone whilst filming somehow, but I think that'd just be too hard. This is I Once Knew a Girl Named Amber Ale, Fresh Hop Edition. So, long-time lovers of the brewery will know that we used to have, before we had Big Red as one of our core range beers, we had a beer that was pretty regularly on tap called I Once Knew a Girl Named Amber Ale. And the concept behind, I miss I Once Knew a Girl Named Amber Ale, despite how much I love Big Red, because the concept behind I Once Knew a Girl Named Amber Ale was that every time we brewed it, it would be a different beer. The only requirement being that it be somewhere in the range of amber. Because an amber ale is not really a true style. It really is just referring to the color. So you can brew something called an amber ale, and it can be anything from a double red IPA to an ESB to a English brown to a American amber. You could do amber lagers. So basically, it's just like a really free style indicator. So it's a great one to just brew a different beer every time. Confuses people at the bar. I'm not going to lie, but once you explain the concept to it, people really like it. And in terms of the naming, it's sort of I do not have an axe named Amber, but it's sort of the idea is. The idea is every time you taste the beer, it's different but same, and it kind of relates to if you've got like an ex-girlfriend or partner, depending on your mood, your memory of them can change a lot. So when you're in a good mood, you have all the sweet memories of them. You're in a bad mood, you have all these bad memories of them, and like it's always the person doesn't change depending on your mood, but your perception of them changes. And so that's sort of the concept behind the naming I Once Knew a Girl Named Amber Ale. So this version of Our Girl Amber is the Fresh Hop Edition. It's 5.9%, and we used Australian-grown Cascade hops in the Whirlpool. You know all about that now. And these hops, Cascade hops, were developed in the Pacific Northwest in the U.S., but we've been growing them down in Tasmania as well for a while. They have a little bit of a different flavor profile. They're a little bit more fruity and floral, and have a little bit less of the traditional pine characteristics of U.S. Cascade. But they're a great hop that gets underused by the smaller breweries, because if you're going to use Cascade, a lot of breweries think, well, if you're going to use Cascade, might as well just use American Cascade, because that's what, if you put Cascade on the label, that's what people are expecting. So let's have a taste. Smells like malt. So this is still meant, even though it's a fresh hop beer, it's still meant to be pretty malty. Oh, I mean, it's good beer. The hop characters in this are a little bit less obvious, but they're definitely there. They're balancing out the malt. Um, and you get a little bit. You do get a little bit of like pine from the Australian Cascade, but you're still getting a lot of that floralness. And we've also dry hopped this with traditional hop pellets as well. So that's probably the nose is probably mostly from that. So that's we also dry hopped with a little bit of Ella, I believe, and more Australian Cascade. But yeah, so you get sort of that fruity, little bit of pine, sweet profile at the front, and then the malt sort of develops as you swallow, and you sort of get that little bit of chocolate and some bitterness and astringency towards the end of the palate. Just really, really happy with this one. Really solid, crushable. Well, it's 5.9%, but drinkable amber ale. So we don't have all day, do we? So just to round that up, again, these are all available at the bar or online shop later this week. Apologies for subscriptions not being the first Friday of the month. It's sometimes awkward for us when the Friday lands on the first of the month. And also, you're going to wait 5 weeks on one side of the subscription or the other, because it also usually, when the Friday lands on the first of the month, it usually means there's 5 Fridays that month. So there'll only be a 4-week wait for the next subscriptions now, which is good. We've got some sweet beers in the fermenters that we're planning to keg this week. I'm imagining at least some of them are going to end up in subscriptions. If you're into hazies, you're in for a treat next month. But yeah, if you guys haven't been down to Brewing in a while, come check us out. And there's what month are we in? April. What's going on? I don't know. Tim was on holiday for 3 weeks, so I'm not sure what events he has lined up. I think there's a beer and cheese tasting he's lining up. So you want to get tickets for that. And we're going to be open over Easter weekend. Our hours might be reduced slightly from staff to deal with staffing purposes, for staffing reasons. So definitely come check us out on Easter weekend, Good Friday. We're not open on the Easter Monday or Anzac Day, but we are open. More or less our usual opening hours. I hope all of you have been enjoying the last of the warm weather and are dodging the COVID. And yeah, I think I've covered everything. I don't even have my my prompt board. I usually have a board in the background that tells me the things I need to cover. But yeah, and if you manage to get through it, and if Tim might not have a chance to edit this, so if you manage to get to this point, congratulations, you're a star. And special prize this month, don't know who it is yet, haven't done that yet. But don't forget, we do a draw of all the subscribers every month, and one lucky person wins a prize. And it's usually a t-shirt or some free beers. And if we start getting, as the subscriber base grows and we get more and more people, that prize can become more and more awesome. So tell your friends about Inner North subscriptions and get them on board. Thanks very much, guys. Bye.